From Olympic City and the home of Pikes Peak, this is the Automotive ADHD Show with Matt West.
And here we are, rocking it on the Automotive ADHD Show, heard on the radio here in Southern Colorado on AM 1460 and FM 101.1 The Answer in Colorado Springs and in the Wet Mountain Valley on 91.7 KLZR. Matt West here hanging out with you, talking cars for the weekend. Got a loaded show for you. We got to move quick through things because I got a lot of stuff to talk about. Dodge gives us a look at the new Charger, just a brief look at it, but I'll give you the details and my thoughts. Also, a few weeks ago, I asked about your first cars, and you answered. We're going to talk about some of your answers and why I think it supports a theory I have about first cars and car enthusiasts. Also, last week, we had a tremendous cold snap. It was brutal cold, and I'm going to have a very special guest joining me here in the third half of the show to talk about what happens to your car when it's cold. What are all the things that happen to it? And should you start your car and, should you just start it cold and drive it, or should you let it warm up? And by the way, you might know this guest if you listen to the show, if you've listened to it for a while, that is. OBD1 Kenobi, Brian, a longtime career technician as well as an enthusiast himself. He's got a weird habit of making strange cars. So we'll get to that and more. We're going to play some of your car sounds as well on this edition of the Automotive ADHD Show. Now, before we get into any of that, this is way cool, by the way. So somebody has figured out how to get a 2004 Porsche 911, and are you ready for this, to run Doom, the video game Doom, as in the original, the old school Doom. Yeah, and so there's a group of people whose entire existence is defined by their ability to make certain consumer electronics that were never designed to run video games or anything run classic Doom. These people, and it's incredible. This is a community of people who do this, and this is interesting. So now what's cool about this is the 996 generation 911, so late 90s, early 2000s, around there. This one in particular is a 2004, and it has something I think is also fairly interesting, which is the Porsche PCCM Plus retrofit head unit. That's a mouthful, but what it is it's basically a custom head unit designed by Porsche to bring your old Porsche into the 21st century, or more or less into the 2020s now. It's got Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, stuff like that, maps, things. It's a touchscreen, but it keeps the classic look. Not classic, but it keeps the period correct look of your center stack there in your 911, which is great. Now granted, yeah, you can go buy any number of touchscreen head units to replace your old one that have, Android Auto and stuff like that. But this is an official Porsche-backed one. That's great. I like seeing Porsche providing support to some of their older products. People tend to keep Porsches around longer than a lot of other cars. So this is cool. I'm sure it costs considerably more than just a regular any aftermarket head unit you could pick. I'm sure it costs tremendously more than that, but that's not the point. The point is, this guy, through some techno wizardry, some things that are above my pay grade, got it to run Doom. Now, how do you control the video game? I don't think that's the point. That's not the point. The point is the principle of it. I mean, the guys who do this are nuts, by the way. They get things like smart refrigerators and toasters to run Doom. I mean, like calculators even. Like anything that has some sort of display, these guys somehow will figure out how to get it to run Doom. And there's some steadfast rules of the universe, one of which being and I can't take credit for this, but one of which being, on a long enough timeline, all things will be LS swapped at some point. And also on a long enough timeline, everything can and will run Doom one way or another. So there you go. If it weren't for guys like this who do this, who get things running Doom, if it weren't for people like this, the world would not be. It would be worse off. In fact, the world may not even be here. I mean, really, we have our existence really to attribute to these guys. So good for them. I mean, they're doing God's work here. They're doing God's work. So anyway, hey, moving on here. So I promised you that I would talk a little bit about the new Dodge Charger. The new Dodge Charger. Okay, so the new Charger is interesting. So Dodge teased us the other day on Instagram with some shots of the new Charger. And they don't always do this, but, Dodge has a marketing strategy and they can be fairly consistent with how they do things. This new Charger that they showed us a pre-production model. It looks remarkably close to the concept Charger Daytona, not the classic Charger Daytona, but the new modern, quote unquote, air quotes, Daytona. It harkens back to that. It's got the roofline of the old Chargers. It definitely has this classic looking Charger roofline, perhaps more so than the current 4-door Charger. And that brings me to what I just said there. It's a 2-door car, which is interesting. Now, the Charger before has been 2 doors. That's fine. But our current Charger that we've had for the past decade and a half or so has been a 4-door car. If you wanted a 2-door, you had to go to the Challenger, and they have been radio silent about the new Challenger. They may not even be bringing the Challenger back. We'll have yet to see. Now, Dodge does this thing though. They said that there's not going to be another Hemi V8 or they didn't say that, but they said we're discontinuing. This is the last of these Hemi V8s, and they do this thing that I like to call the classic rock band theory, because you get classic rock bands, whether it's Kiss, it's Motley Crue, is Def Leppard, or whatever. You get these bands, and what happens is they'll say, "Oh, we're doing the last tour. This is your last chance to see us live. We're doing our last tour, end of the road tour." And then what they do their end of the road tour. Everybody buys tickets because, oh my gosh, it's the last time I'm going to see Kiss, or last time I'm going to see, whoever, Aerosmith, right? Just name any band pretty much. As long as the members are still alive, that is usually a prerequisite there. But that being said, I say usually a prerequisite, but that being the case, what they end up doing is they end up coming along and they, a year goes by, 2 years go by, and then they go, "Oh, we're doing a reunion tour. Here we go. Here's our reunion tour. We're doing all of the hits. We're bringing it back. We're doing it just as good, if not better." And that happens. And Dodge does the same thing. They tell us, "Oh, this is the last of these Hemi V8s." And everyone goes, "Oh, I got to buy the last Hemi cars. These are the end of the road Hemi cars." And then they'll come out with another one, or they'll make it, but it'll be a little different. And there might be a gap between it. And I think that's what's going to happen here. I don't think Dodge is going to know with their bottom line to completely discontinue V8s in their performance cars. Now, they are saying that some of their performance cars are going to be equipped with the Hurricane inline 6s, turbo inline 6. Cool idea. There's been some reliability issues with the early ones, but overall, I think that's a good idea. There's going to be, we saw a few months back a Ram TRX test mule with clearly a straight 6 in it. So, they're gonna do that. They also want to move to some hybrid, some EV. Now, is this production prototype that we saw online? Is this what is it electric? I don't know. I couldn't see any exhaust pipes on it. But that being the case, some other shots of these Chargers on the production line clearly show a transmission tunnel and the architecture of the car, the bones of the car clearly look like they can still house an engine and a transmission. So are we seeing, I don't think Dodge is going to do this hard conversion to EVs on that. They know their audience, and they know that's not going to sell. They know the guys who buy these cars are not buying EVs for that reason. And hopefully if they do an EV version or a partially electric version or whatever, hopefully they don't include any of the ridiculous, weird, fake EV noises that we saw with the concept car. When they unveiled the concept car, they said, EV, the muscle has been electrified, right? And then it made these weird, like, cat meowing sounds, like, meow, and that was it. And they said, well, we're amplifying the sounds of the electric motor. No, come on, guys. Stop. It's fake. It's fake. We don't want it. Enthusiasts don't want that. It's disingenuous. I've talked about it before. I did a whole segment on this show about that. If I have an electric car, it needs to make the sound that it makes. If that's no sound, that's fine. You can't fake it. It's not real. Anyway, hey, we'll talk about this and more, and we'll get to OBD1 Kenobi. We're talking cold weather. We're talking EVs again, actually, and more, and maybe some of his latest projects. Coming up here on the Automotive ADHD show, right here on AM 1460 and FM 101.1 The Answer and 91.7 KLZR. Don't go anywhere.
And now for how things work with an engineer.
Rotary engines. Regret.
And that was how things work with an engineer. More of How Things Work can be found at facebook.com/automotive-ADHD.
Here we are, rocking it on the Automotive ADHD Show, AM 1460 and FM 101.1, The Answer. Matt West here, hanging out with you. Those car sounds were courtesy of my guest. Coming up in the next segment, OBD1 Kenobi, otherwise known as Brian. Brian's a great guy. He likes putting flat sixes in Subarus, and he's got a weird Volvo addiction, and I couldn't tell you why. There's some things about people you just can't fix. So anyway, he's going to be joining me here in the next segment. I'm really excited to have him on. You can send those car sounds, by the way, into the Facebook page, facebook.com/automotive-ADHD. You can email me, Matt, at throttlewarrior.com. And right now through April, or at least until I give away all of these, anyone who sends car sounds in from now until April, you get one of these, Automotive ADHD key tag, a nice embroidered key tag, helps you fish your keys out of your pocket. I'm going to wave it in front of the microphone as if the radio listeners can see it. Also, you get a As Heard on the Automotive ADHD Show sticker right there. You can see it for my viewers on video. Yes, we are on video, YouTube and Rumble. You can see that on the back of my laptop there. So there you go. Now, what we were talking about before the break, Dodge and the new Charger, and just a couple thoughts to wrap up on that. Is that they got the styling down. It looks classic. That's good. They're bringing back the Daytona nameplate on it because they know nostalgia sells. And overall, it's probably going to be a good car. Do we know for sure if it's not going to have a V8? No, we don't. Do we know for sure if it's going to be hybrid only, electric only? No, we don't. Probably not, though. I can make some educated guesses, and I'm going to say no. Though they got the look down, they've kind of modernized the look. It's the front looks a little too squinty, in my opinion, right now, but I think it's going to grow on folks, and it'll probably grow on me. I mean, it's a sharp-looking car. Definitely looks, when you think of a Charger, it looks like a Charger. So good job on Dodge for doing that. We'll see what they do at the drivetrains, though. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but I have, like I said, some educated guesses on that. So one thing I talked about a couple of weeks ago was, what was your first car? What was your first car, right? And so, I was talking about best first cars, and I caught some flack for not saying Toyota because, okay, yes, Toyotas make great first cars. They really do. Any Toyota ever. I'll amend my statement. I did recommend Volvos, though, as first cars because, you have to kind of find a line between if you're a teenager, maybe you're a parent right now and you're looking for a first car for your kid, or maybe you're a teenager. I've got a wide audience wide range of folks who listen to the show. The teenager wants something really cool, fun, fast, and interesting. The parent wants exactly the opposite of that, really boring, slow, and safe. And I think when you bring Volvo into the equation, you kind of create both of those because they're affordable, generally speaking. Used ones, at least, are reasonable. They're affordable. They're safe. They're some of the safest cars on the road. In fact, they have a reputation for that. And they're still enthusiast cars. You can have a little bit of fun with them. They're interesting. They're a little different than, your average kid's first car. So, I think that's why they make a great compromise. And generally speaking, they're reliable. You have some, expenses on them that can be a little higher ticket expenses. But generally speaking, as far as European cars go, they're pretty reliable as far as European cars go. Especially if you go back to the Volvo 240. If you go back that old, I mean, you can't kill that. Those red blocks, those red block 4-cylinders, good luck killing one. I mean, it's that and the Toyota pickup truck are pretty much indestructible existences. If a Toyota pickup truck and a Volvo red block collided, I don't know what would happen. The universe might actually end because, I mean, that is a true example of an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. So I don't know what would happen, but so far I don't think it's ever happened, and we're still here to talk about it. So that's good. That's good. Now, I got some interesting responses, though, on the Facebook page, on Instagram, from you. And I just want to go through some of these because these are kind of fun. It supports a theory I have about first cars. Christopher, he says his first car was a 1986 Ford Mustang LX hatchback. 2.3 liter 4-cylinder, 3-speed auto, and he says he paid $350 for it when he got it. Did all his own maintenance, did all of his own repairs. DW 1985 Monte Carlo SS. Ooh, that's fun. That's fun. And then Ed says 1976 Ford Torino. That's also a fun car. A new long lore. He says his first car when he was 18 was a 1986 Toyota Celica Supra P-Type. That is the second generation Toyota Supra. I think a criminally underappreciated Supra. I think they're some of the best looking Supras. They have this beautiful wedge design from the 1980s. I mean, they scream 80s, and they got great proportions. I think those are really cool. Everyone's so hyped about the Mark IV Supras. Everyone's very hyped about, even you see some of the third generation Supras, which are great cars on their own as well, starting to go up in price. But the second generation cars, underappreciated. I love that era of Toyota styling. I mean, that's no secret. That's the same era alongside with my AE86 that sometimes runs. It was in the showroom at the same time. I like that era of Toyota. Here's one of my favorite entries here, though, in terms of first car. Artem, he is a longtime listener and definitely a self-proclaimed TVR enthusiast. By the way, he owns one of the few, if not maybe the only TVR Cerbras in the United States, and it's the same one that was on Car Trek. He bought it from like Ed Bolian practically. So so that's really cool. And he sent those car sounds into the show before. He said, and I'll read his post here. He said, "Wild 90s in a post-Soviet Union lawless Russia." And he puts a picture up, and you're gonna have to go to the Facebook page to see the picture. This is awesome. He says he's 13, and this is his first car, 1971 Zaz, Z-A-Z, is a Russian car, 966, with a Mercedes-Benz grill stuck to the front of it. And it looks the part. It looks like a baby Benz. It is, honestly, he says, a 1200cc air-cooled V4 with maybe 40 horsepower. And he says, probably the only time I was the coolest cat on the block. He's got the picture there. He definitely does look like he was the coolest dude on the block. I mean, that Benz grill on there, you don't think that would work. Why would that? You don't think that would work, but it totally works. It fits the part. And I think that's amazing. And so what I'm noticing is with all of these, with first cars and everything, is that, we have the more enthusiast side of things. The weirder your first car is, the cheaper that it ultimately is. The more you have to work on it. It's a cheap car. You got to work on it. You got to learn stuff on it. These all contribute to growing a car enthusiast. My first car was a 1988 Toyota 4Runner, and I knew nothing about cars with that, and I learned a lot working on it. Unfortunately, that car met an untimely demise. I actually didn't have it around very long. Got into a head-on collision with it on a backcountry road that I really wasn't at fault for, and no one was hurt, but it completely destroyed the 4Runner, which was really sad. And but that being said, we learn with our first cars. We learn to wrench on them. We learn to do all of this, and that is so important, right? If you want to cultivate another generation of car enthusiasts, they need cars that can work. Now, that they can work on, I should say. And when was the last time you saw someone, who, oh yeah, my first car was a brand new, Nissan Altima. My parents bought it for me brand new. And it ran all the time and there were never any problems with it. I'm sure there's folks whose first car was that and they came out a car enthusiast. I'm not trying to paint here with a broad brush, but I think generally speaking, people who have a first car like that, they don't always become car enthusiasts. I think if you've got a weird first car, it's gonna lead to being a car nut in one way or another. So parents, listen closely there. Listen closely. Also, gotta say, Eric Anderson, last comment here on the Facebook page, Matchbox, his first car. That's when you start. You start them young, just saying. Now, hey, don't go anywhere. OBD1 Kenobi is my guest, and he is joining me right here after the break on Automotive ADHD.
Colorado Springs' #1 car show by default. This is Automotive ADHD. All right. Hey, you can send those car sounds
into the show. That was Brandon's Jeep YJ with the 4-liter straight 6. And I think my guest here joining me has probably seen me driving one of those around and maybe breaking one of those once before too. Have you seen that, by the way?
Yes.
You have? Okay. Do you remember what my rod bearings looked like in that 4.0?
Very similar to my truck.
Oh, yeah, but you're just still driving?
Copper.
Yeah. So you're joining us here on the Automotive ADHD show on AM 1460 and FM 101.1 The Answer, as well as on 91.7 KLZR. And joining me across from the toolbox here is Brian, otherwise known as OBD1 Kenobi. Brian, thanks for joining me on the show.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
And thanks for coming back, because we had a slight snafu on the last radio show where it didn't actually record the radio.
Some technical difficulty on Matt's part.
Yeah. I'm a professional, I swear. I think I'm a professional. I tell myself that at times. So anyway, what we are going to talk about today, because we had some really tremendously cold weather earlier in the past week here. And I mean, even here in the Springs, it was down to, what was it? I think -12 at my house.
Yeah, it was negatives.
Yeah. Well, how cold was it at your house?
-8.
Woo! Yeah, and so the thing is, with the cold like this, it reminded me, perhaps painfully so, that I need to replace the batteries in multiple vehicles, because I tried going to the radio station the next day, and it was cold enough that my truck, my Tacoma, the daily that's supposed to be, reliable and start every day, the Tacoma didn't start. So I go to the Jeep didn't start. So I go to the other Jeep. That didn't start either. So then I finally had to dig out the jump pack, which was in the back of the truck. And because it was 12 degrees, the jump pack wouldn't start anything either.
Yep.
So then I had to bring the jump pack inside and charge it up for a little bit, go back out, and then actually start my cars. And so if you've been procrastinating on changing your battery, if you've been letting it go long, if the car's cranking a little slower than it usually does, the cold will remind you to do that. But the reason I want to ask you this, Brian, is because as a technician, you've been working on cars for over almost a decade here now. How long have you been working on cars professionally?
8 years. Working on 9.
Working on 9 years professionally. And so what, in your opinion, changes when cars are cold, right? When we have these horrible cold weather snaps, mechanically speaking, what's happening with your car?
Well, most people go straight to the engine, but there's so much else that's also experiencing the cold. You get in your car, LCD screens don't refresh. They're all ghosted. Wheel bearings, all very tight and taut because the grease is cold. And if you think that's cold, so is the fluid in trans, so is the fluid in power steering, so is the brake fluid, so is pretty much everything is turning into syrup. Obviously, the engine's going to be sapped for heat. So you're going to have your climate system on full tilt heat, trying to defrost those windows and trying to warm yourself up. So you can imagine a lot of the energy is getting used in friction.
Right.
And as well as trying to warm yourself up.
The car is as cold as you are sitting in the car.
Yes.
If not worse, because you just came from a warm house or a warm office building or something.
I think it's more interesting to talk about how many other things besides the engine actually are affected by the cold.
Right.
Like the other day, it's kind of interrelated, but our Dodge Dakota starter started sticking when in the cold.
That's right. You were telling me that. Yeah.
And then I couldn't use the LCD screen in the XC90. It was a blur. It's a total blur. There's a lot of things that are just affected by the cold in that. I mean, you can't take a car apart when it's cold.
Yeah, you don't.
At least not the interior.
You really don't want to.
I mean, yeah.
You really don't want to. Now speaking, that was things aside from the engine, but speaking of the engine, right? This is a topic that's always contested. We've talked about it before on the show, but we have some new listeners maybe joining us on the radio, which is, how long should you let the car warm up? Do you let your car warm up at all? Do you just get in it and send it? How do you look at that as a technician?
I could be misled on this, but from my understanding, newer technology is supposed to have you basically hop in your car and let it warm up for the minimum amount of time and start driving it right away. People obviously are more accustomed to letting their cars warm up for lots of reasons other than just the engine's health or performance, but more of comfort.
Right.
So your climate system's heated up and the windows are defrosted and whatnot. But from my general understanding, they would like and prefer you to be in your car driving right away. I think mainly due to emissions.
Really? Because, well, I've heard that you need to get the catalytic converter, right? The catalytic converter is most efficient at a certain temperature. So it's important that you heat that up, right?
Yeah, the catalyst doesn't work unless it's at the temperature.
Right. And so if manufacturers have this incentive when it comes to building cars for them to be as efficient as possible and have as few emissions as possible, and that's probably one of them, isn't it?
One of the things I've heard and don't fully understand is that some of their engine management's actually purposely designed so that when it's not warmed up or is in the process of warming up the catalytic converter, it will, in a sense, purposely make the engine run bad, whether it be a misfire or retarded timing, to promote extra heating of the exhaust until it reaches the operating temperature, which most of the time isn't even actually necessarily monitored, but algorithmically calculated.
Okay. Interesting. So what do you do then with your personal cars? Do you just get in and drive them?
I try to. If it's not miserable. That said, I mean, most of my cars are projects, so getting into them and trying to get them started is more of the game of will it start than do I want to start driving right away.
Right. And that's even when it's not cold. Will it start, right?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
I'd hate to say that, but yes, a lot of it's just experimenting.
That's fair. And while we're talking project cars here, we're also going to talk a little bit here in the next segment.
Speaking of cold, it's kind of cold in here.
Well, I know it's cold in here. If you're just joining us, by the way, on the radio, I usually do the show from the studio, but through the magic of technology, there are times when I can do it from the garage, and this is great because you can also watch it on video, by the way, from here in the garage. And we're going straight from the garage to the radio studio, to the transmitter, to your ears. And it's very cool, but it's also very cold here in said garage. It is not an insulated garage.
I'm so glad you gave me back my beanie.
Yeah, I stole his beanie for a couple of weeks. And he's wearing it right now because it is cold in here, though it's not as cold in here as it was earlier in the week. I will say that much. Now, we're going to talk a little bit, too, in the next segment about EVs. I think that's going to be really interesting to get into not only how do EVs behave in the cold from a mechanical perspective, how do they behave, but also, Brian, your thoughts just in general on EVs and how that landscape has changed now. How from, you working on them, how are manufacturers training technicians to work on them? How is that transition going? We've got more EVs and a lot of manufacturers sell gas cars still, but have EVs in the fleet. So we're going to get into all of that and more here in the next segment. But before we do that, let's talk about some of your personal project cars right now. Yeah, let's talk about that because you've got a few project cars that are actually kind of fun. And I've played the car sounds on this show before, namely a flat six swapped Subaru. Tell me about that.
Well, it wasn't supposed to be a flat six swap Subaru, but then it happened.
It just happened? It just, the flat six materialized in there?
So I had bought my first ever Subaru.
Okay.
Old, crusty Impreza from a friend at work, in sort of a trade for my XC90, which I've now gotten back.
This is how it works with mechanics, right?
It's just kind of swap.
It's just cycling cars. You trade someone your car for another car, and then you end up buying your old car back from them. And
I'm really glad to have it back. And then even like the other day, he's like, I kind of miss it.
And you're like, no, you're not getting it back this time.
Sorry, the cycle has to stop.
For the record, if you're unfamiliar with Brian, who I also like to call OBD1 Kenobi, he is a Volvo technician. He is a mechanic. He has tons of weird project cars. Most of them are Volvos. And we're going to get his thoughts and more on some of the projects, some of EVs, and all of that coming up here in just a minute. You're listening to Automotive ADHD right here on AM 1460 and FM 101.1, The Answer.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Speed Council proudly presents Automotive ADHD, now on video. For better or for worse, subscribe to Automotive ADHD, now playing on YouTube and Rumble.
All right, and here we are. We are back on the Automotive ADHD show, heard around Southern Colorado on the radio and sometimes online as a podcast as well. This is really fun with the car sounds because as a listener what those car sounds are, because there's a good chance you sent those in, especially if you're Patrick and you sent those car sounds in because those are his. But I can quiz my guest, OBD1 Kenobi, Brian, on the car sounds. What do you think that was? Can you play it again for me? I wasn't paying attention. No, I'm not playing it again. Nope, you got You only get once.
No?
No call outs either.
No call. Can I phone a friend?
No, that's a call out. You can't do that. Do you have any
Text
guesses?
a friend?
No.
No, I seriously,
You don't know?
I missed it.
You may-
I was busy looking at your face.
that was, oh yeah, it's a face for radio, isn't it?
You should play it one more time for me.
You know what? No, I think we'll give you the benefit of the doubt, and I'll just tell you what it is. But in the future, when I have you on, I'm gonna put you on the spot and grill you
put
on
me
these.
on the spot. You grilled me good.
I'm gonna grill you on these car sounds. That was a Suzuki Carry K car, 3-cylinder from Japan.
Oh, there's no way I would have guessed that.
I know that's why I threw it at you.
I might have guessed it was a 3-cylinder, but I would never. Suzuki, no.
I know. There's some great car sounds that my listeners send into the show. And you can send those car sounds in yourself, facebook.com/automotiveadhd, and I can use them to torment Brian when he's a guest on the show.
Yeah, I space out.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I do too, but I just keep talking when it happens. So anyway, that being said, we've got some interesting things to talk about. So we were talking about cold weather, and it has been very cold. And we talked about in the last segment how, some of the things you don't expect with the car get cold: bushings, rubber, plastic, LCDs, things like that. But let's also talk about EVs, because this is a hot topic. EVs are really relevant in the mainstream eye right now. And there's a lot of misinformation about EVs, but there's also some stuff about EVs that is factual and maybe isn't the greatest. Now, I will say, I've mentioned on this show, one of the things that I've had the chance to experience is the new F-150 Lightning. And honestly, I kind of like it.
Don't get me wrong. I personally do like hopping in the EVs. I do have some complaints about the way that they're styled, or the way that the creature features and the the controls are set up in these cars.
Yeah.
Which is personally why I'm so biased with our XC40s right now. Because I think they're like one of the only EVs I've gotten into where it just kind of feels like a regular car.
Really?
It's pretty close to the current lineup of cars we have. I mean, unfortunately, all of the manufacturers are going to these touchscreen tablet sort of center screens that handle all the climate and the radio and all the features.
Well, they make them feel like smartphones on wheels is what they're making them feel like.
They literally are. Our SPA 5 generation has 2 different SIM cards.
Wow. That's more SIM cards than my actual smartphone has.
Right.
And it's a car. And that's the thing I've talked about on the show, probably a couple years ago on the show, but there was a study that found that cars, like when you have actual controls in cars, be them physical controls.
Oh, yeah, you told me about this.
Or the touchscreen controls. And they measured it not by how long it takes you to do certain tasks, like turn on the heated seats. They measured it by the distance you traveled with your eyes off the road, which is
That's right.
Really interesting. And the fact is that it was, I don't have this study.
There's no feedback with the touchscreen. You don't even know if you press the right button.
Right. So the thing is, it took somewhere around 3 times longer to actually engage a certain set of tasks, like turn the heated seats on, turn on the radio to this frequency, and which better, by the way, be either AM 1460 and FM 101.1 The Answer, or 91.7 KLZR. Better be on those 2 frequencies. But that being said, the beautiful thing about this was with the physical buttons, the driver didn't even have to take their eyes off the road. They could feel it and do it.
I'm pretty sure that any of my cars, I can easily set the climate controls up way faster than any of our tablet cars. It honestly bothers me a lot that they continue to do it. And I think they really need to go back a step and kind of realize that maybe the touchscreen doesn't belong in the car. I do say, however, the one thing I do like with the touchscreens that they put in our cars is they're actually an infrared array.
On the Volvo specifically, right?
That I know of, yeah. And that way, it doesn't matter what you're using per se. It doesn't have to be a bare finger. You could use a pencil, you could use the edge of your phone. You technically can just use it just about anything to touch the touchscreen, and it feels just like a capacitive. It's even multi-touch. Right. But it works with gloves and things like that because because the screen isn't looking for you actually touching the glass. It's not looking for you to interrupt the array. Right. And so now that's one thing. I agree with you on electric cars. They all have to have touchscreens. They all have to have a lot of this. I think there would be a market. I don't know if it would be the primary demographic car makers want, but if you made a bare bones, stripped down electric car that just worked and behaved like a regular car, and I feel like people would buy it. You know, another thing too, sorry, my hand was covering the microphone there. The other thing too is the other problem we're having with, and I'm not saying this is a Volvo specific thing, per se, but a lot of the problems I'm seeing with these cars that are going to a more sophisticated center tablet screen is that they're relying on a heavier, OS, which requires boot times, updates, and they become less and less reliable. And we actually see a lot of them crashing or the internal hardware failing from heat. Whereas, a typical system with a dedicated little, processor that maybe has a few kilobytes of data on it that just handle a couple basic things, move dampener motors via LIN bus.
Right.
They just work.
Right.
They just work. Why overcomplicate things?
Well, that and moving that into some of the other things with EVs that we don't like is just the repairability, I think. As a consumer who likes working on your own vehicle, it feels like EVs, and I don't know if your Volvo platform ones are so much like this, but it feels like every part of them, and Tesla's the biggest, I think, offender of this, which is you can't, even if you want to do the work yourself, they won't sell you the parts for it. They are the sole proprietor of all the parts and the distribution for it.
I will say, as a technician, this is my perspective on it, and I don't think it's the best perspective, but just to see it from like what we're coming from, as far as we're handling with the manufacturer and the way that they're training us to handle these cars, is they're treating these cars a lot like a hot potato. Like they're incredibly dangerous. They treat these way different than gasoline cars.
Well, it is high voltage, which is dangerous.
There's a lot of risks involved when dealing with high voltage, and for example, I mean, even if you get electrocuted and you walk away from it, they expect you to hospitalize yourself because your blood, could be boiled. Some per se, I'm not super privy on all of the details, but like, I guess your blood, if you do get electrocuted for a good amount of time, your blood can become acidic.
Really?
Yes, and it could actually kill you later on. So you might survive the initial shock, but wake up dead. Or I shouldn't wake up dead. Be dead tomorrow.
Very shocking, by the way.
Very shocking.
Have you ever heard of anyone in the technician space getting hurt doing that, or just working on an electric car in general?
Maybe not specifically getting hurt or shocked. Maybe shocked. But I have heard of some mishaps with batteries getting shorted and then being swiftly put outside while they burned it down. There was some issues, if I wasn't mistaken, with one of them where the even after disabling the high voltage battery, basically breaking it down into individual parts that are less than the dangerous level of voltage.
Right, because a battery is built of multiple cells typically.
Yes, they've been trying all these different things. And I think this goes for every manufacturer. They've been trying to find ways to build their batteries in ways that can be serviced safely by being able to break them into like smaller bits. So like, the battery might be 400 volts, but obviously each cell is not 400 volts. So we can break them by taking buses out and then get them below the considered dangerous voltage level. But there was I think a situation where like many batteries with built-in BMSs and stuff, there is some thin wires that probe each cell or are directly attached to the high voltage, specifically to monitor the forward voltage on that specific cell. And I guess there were not mentioned in some instructions that get torn and short against the casing, and all hell breaks loose.
Wow. Okay, so what we are going to do, this is a new thing here on the show. We are going to continue this conversation as well as talk about some other stuff like standalone ECUs on the podcast-only section of the show, which you can catch on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, all of the fine places where you can find shows and mine. And also, you remember, don't miss a minute of this show. Listen to it as well on Spotify, Amazon, iTunes, and more. I will see you right here next week.